My name is Mehmet Ozalp, Associate Professor Mehmet Ozalp at Chartered University in Australia. I am the Director of Center for Islamic Studies and Civilization. I'm also the founder and Executive Director of Islamic Sciences and Research Academy, which is a community organization in Australia. We are based in Sydney and Melbourne. And we want to raise, well, our aim is to raise the level of high-level Islamic learning in Australia. Now, I'll share my screen. I have some slides. The title of my presentation is God's Universal Communication with Creation and 4 Types of God's Revelation in the Qur'anic Framework. When we talk about revelation, which is wahi, in Arabic, we generally understand it as God's revelation and communication to human beings through prophets of Allah, prophets of God, and these come in the form of books, and Quran being one of them. Now, obviously, this is the case because the Quran itself talks about Allah or God sending wahi through the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and many other prophets. The problem with this, this is a bit of a rather narrow understanding of wahi, and it's actually possible to extend the Quranic understanding or Quranic expression of God revealing himself to and through creation. And hopefully this will help us understand Quran better. And I will come to the significance of why this is important. But one of the key things that this produces is that it creates a dualistic mindset amongst Muslims, which is un-Islamic. Actually, it's a product of modernity, and as in. Muslims tend to think, oh, this is Quran, the realm of religion, and then the natural world, the realm of philosophy, science, which is alien to Islam. And we create this dualistic understanding of the world. And that also sometimes affects, or not sometimes, often affects our behaviors as well. We tend to compartmentalize our behavior. This is religious, I'm praying, and sometimes people do unethical things, thinking that that's not part of the religion, or it's the normal world, operating in a normal world where religion is not dominant. So this dualistic mindset and behaviors is a problem, in my view, which reflects itself even in the way we see education as well. So hopefully, I'm hoping that a broader understanding of what revelation is as God's communication to and through his creation will help us solve that problem. Now, the logical underpinning of my argument is this. I'll just put it on this slide. Basically, well, one of the problems that we have is that our scholars in the past did not really understand revelation in a very, very broad term. So I have to lay the foundation of that. And that's what the entire purpose of this, my chapter will be in the book. So basically, it starts with the well-known premise. Number one, wahi is God's speech and communication to human beings through messengers of God, of course. Like you can expand each of these. But that Allah speaks to human beings through prophets. And the two, that if God speaks and communicates with creation other than human beings, then God communicates with entire creation. So if we can show that in Quran demonstrates that God speaks to creation other than human beings, then we have narrowly understood wahi. And then the premise number 3 there is God speaks and communicates with creation other than human beings, which I shall illustrate the truth of that third premise there, which is the key to the entire thing, argument. And then we show, then it follows that God communicates with entire creation. And if we combine 1 and 4, then we get that our overall conclusion is that Wahi is communication with human beings and the entire creation. And that is the ultimate conclusion that I want to get to as a result of my research and the writing of the chapter. The significance of this study is that it will enable us to appreciate Quran in a broad sense. You know, Quran, we see as Muslims and believers, we see Quran as this source of a treasure troves of knowledge and wisdom, but yet we limit its meanings. So hopefully this is an example of appreciating Quran in a far more broader sense. This will also improve our understanding of God's relationship with and governance in the universe. Like we say, as Muslims believe that God creates the entire creation and he governs it. But how? How does he do that? And obviously I'm not going to go into the entire cosmology, but I feel that God's speaking and communicating with creation is a very important element of God's creation and sustaining of the universe, and it gives us clues on how that operates beyond the 3 dimensions of existence, and also, more importantly, we see the world as a place where God speaks through his creation. This will help hopefully end the duality of science and religion in the mind of believers, and also better appreciation of the natural environment. If we see the universe, the world, the creatures in it, the living plants and animals, as a book, or like as a book of revelation that God speaks to and through, and then we respect that creation, and hence there will be a religious motive to preserve the environment, and Muslims should be acting to address the climate change. I actually wrote an article, an op-ed during the COP26, where I argued that Muslims should be part of the conversation, and then we were missing in that. I don't want to digress, but so this is the main significance, or one of the significance of this research, and this addressing the God of the gaps objection, which kind of atheists or usually scientific that use science kind of say that, oh, well, people believe in God because they cannot explain. There are gaps in our explanations. And if we can explain things through science, then you no longer need God. So this is a major objection of people, irreligious people or atheistic people make. So I guess the arguments that we have in this project, the entire project, and in my chapter, hopefully will help address that problem. So God is the God of Islam is not God of the gaps, but God of the entire creation, irrespective of how we explain and how we understand the creation to be. Now, to build my argument, I'm using 5 key ideas from Said Nursi. For those of you who may not know Said Nursi, he's a Kurdish ethnic, but he lived in Turkey from late Ottoman era and early modern Turkey. He was a major scholar in that period, and he wrote from 1925 to 1960 major theological works, and which I feel is very significant in many respects as modern theological commentary on the Quran. Now, the first one is the obvious one, that God speaks to human beings through messengers of God. But Nursi puts a very nice and impeccable logical flow where, in a nutshell, he says God's speaks because God has knowledge. He creates with knowledge. And the one who knows and the one who speaks will speak to a conscious being, and that amongst conscious beings, he will speak to human beings who are the most comprehensive of all conscious beings, and amongst them, he will speak to the ones that will represent God's message in the best possible ways, and they are the illustrious chain of prophets, including Prophet Muhammad. So that is very much within, obviously, the framework that I'm trying to build, that God's speaking through to human beings through revelation. The second interesting thing is in relation to major archangels. Well, my topic is not angels, but I think this is important in that, at least when I read it, it really expanded my understanding of God's revelation. So basically, when Nursi was explaining the function of the 4 archangels, he was saying that they represent wahi, like life-giving, life-taking, and provision of sustenance, like 4 fundamental acts of God's rububiyyah. And here, the communication or God speaking to his creation, Jibril represents that. So if Jibril represents the entire act of God communicating to his creation, so therefore the God wahi cannot be just what is revealed to prophets. So it needs to be more than that.
You have another 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mashid. Time flies. And there are 2, and the third idea that Nursi makes is that there are 2 types of revelation, and that's revelation to messengers, and then inspiration to human heart. And he makes this distinction. He gives an analogy of, let's say, a king speaking to all of his subjects, and if he wanted to do that, he would appoint a special envoy. He would give him a decree, an official decree, and then this envoy would go from town to town, basically broadcast that message from the king into entire nation. So that is like the revelation given, wahi given to a prophet. But then he says that the king may address a particular personal issue of one individual, and in that case, he just has to pick up the phone, ring him up, and address that. Nobody else has to know. And that is the inspirational given to human heart. So basically what he's saying is that we all receive God's communication, which is more personal, more indirect, or doesn't have to come with bells and whistles. So this is also, this really opened my eyes when I read that, or my understanding, I should say, that, well, if God speaks to messengers and human beings, well, why not the rest of the creation? And we get also 2 additional ideas from him. The fourth one here is that, so God revelation through universe is a book of creation. So he says that there is Sharia is actually 2. There's one Sharia, but it has 2 parts. One is the Sharia al-Qur'aniya, which is the revelation that, or God's commandments that we get from commandments and provisions that we get from the Quran. But then there's also Sharia al-Takwiniya, which is the God's laws in the creation. So if we're talking about laws here, then you get laws from the Quran and laws from the creation to universe, and they're both to be read. They're both books of revelation, but of different kind. One expressed purely in language, the other one is expressed through the universe, through living beings. So this enables us to think that what the natural laws that may exist in the universe, what we call natural laws, are actually God's revelation, God's communication to the entire creation. And finally, last one is that God's speech or kalam is limitless, just as his knowledge and power are limitless. So and that's because kalam, like as scholars said, that is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's an attribute of God. So it's always there. It was always there before. It will always be there. The attributes do not start and finish. So why limit the kalam or speech of God to only the revelation in books? Because they're finite at the end of the day. Yes, maybe infinite meanings are conveyed, but nevertheless, the words actually are finite. And the evidence for this view is that God's speech is limitless is this verse from the Quran, 31:27 and 18:109. If all the trees of the earth were pens and the whole sea were ink, and 7 Moses added, then the words of God would not be exhausted in writing. So we usually think, when we read this verse, we think that, oh, okay, this is just a possibility if it happened. But what Nursi says is that, well, this actually is happening, that God is speaking through creation, and basically all information we have in the universe could be God speaking, or what these verses are talking about. I'm running out of time, but I won't go in detail, but just very briefly. So the Quranic basis of all of these 4 types of revelation can be based in the Quran. Like this prophetic revelation is one type. Then there's inspiration to human heart is also mentioned in the Quran. We have animal instincts, like the word wahi is used in relation to the bees. So basically we can generalize it. Obviously, the Quran is not going to say, mention all of the instincts of animals, but this is just an example that what we see, this amazing behaviors from animals, are actually God revealing and guiding these animals. And also God speaking to inanimate objects. And here, a couple of examples, like God speaking to heaven and earth, and they are not. We know that they're not living beings, and there's a communication taking place. And the earthquake is mentioned as God revealed to the earth. So these are clues, direct evidence from the Quran that proves the truth that God speaks to his entire creation, and therefore, we can make my overall conclusion that revelation, wahi, is God's communication to and through his creation as a reflection of his lordship. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if Mashid is there.
Your microphone is unmute. Can you mute it, please? Mashid.
Yeah, just trying to unmute. Okay. Right, we're going to have 15 minutes break. So we'll be back at 11:45.
Is there no Q&A?
Oh, sorry. No, we're going to have question and answers 15 minutes first. Sorry about that. Yeah.
No worries.
Chat. Are there any questions? I can't see any in the chat box. So I don't know if the panel want to ask.
I think Timothy has raised his hand, Mashid.
Okay. Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you so much, Brother Mehmet, for that, really interesting and I think in some ways challenging presentation. Question that I have is, if we're going to embrace this larger concept of divine speech, and if indeed we see the entirety of the creation as the theater of divine communication, I'm wondering if you're going to need to come to a position on the eternality or the the pre-eternity of divine speech. In other words, the createdness or the uncreatedness of the divine speech. Because if we're going to take this seriously and see the creation as really the primordial book, and I think that's absolutely the correct position to take, then what do we do with this question of the createdness or the uncreatedness of divine speech? Is this an attribute that has eternally been with God even before the creation, or is this an attribute that God creates as a mode through which God then relates to the creation? And I think that the implications, I know that this was a burning medieval debate with the Mu'tazilites and others, but I think it does have interesting implications for interpretation and contextualization of that divine speech. And so I'm wondering if that's a question that you've considered in your your research and your writing.
In this particular, thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. A very excellent question, and I haven't really discussed that in the chapter that I'm working on, but it is a valid question, an excellent one, and I would say that similar to the attribute of takwin, in the Ash'ari and Maturidi theological schools, as you may know, that there was a debate between the two scholars and theologians, that the Maturidi theologians argued that there is an attribute called takwin, which is God giving existence to things, and that existence, giving existence to things which are temporal in and of themselves. So those things did not really exist before, and then now they exist, and that happens. Nursi talks about two types of creation. I'm going to compare this to the speech aspect. That's why maybe it's analogous, the two, I believe. So Said Nursi says that there are two types of creation, like one from nothing, and then there is creation from the things that already exist, which is insha. And this is actually Qur'anic. In the Quran, it also says that God creates and then repeats his creation. So if obviously the Ash'ari scholars didn't like the attribute of takwin, because it would then lead to the understanding that, or the conclusion that, or possible conclusion that created things, the things that we see around us, would have some eternity, because the attributes are eternal. But there is a resolution to that. The resolution is that there's a difference between the attribute and the effects of attributes, and what we call ta'alluqat, which is the connection of attribute to the effect of that attribute. So the effect and the connection, the relationship, are temporal. They're not eternal, but the attribute is. So by the same token, we can really apply by analogy the attribute of kalam. Like if, and by the way, the Ash'ari solution to the problem or this issue is that there is no attribute of takwin, but God says kun, and be, and it is. So they take it to the kalam side, which is an attribute as well, So I don't know why they do that, but it doesn't really solve the problem from an Ash'ari thinking. But it really comes down to what I was saying, that, so yeah, the God's speech is, as an attribute, is permanent or eternal, let's say, but God is always speaking, and the effects of that speech on created beings are temporal. They're not permanent, or sorry, they're not eternal. Now, otherwise, yeah, we would go to the conclusion that the entire universe is eternal, and clearly not. Things begin to exist and they die and they disintegrate and things like that. I don't know, does it make sense? It's maybe from an Islamic theological perspective, it kind of...
No, thank you. I just, it seems to me that somehow, some way, it's it's a relevant, it's a relevant aspect of, whenever we're talking about divine communication and the, the nature of the attributes, it's something that we can't fully escape. But I don't think that this is a question that our tradition has satisfactorily resolved. And so I think it continues to be a somewhat vexing question for us. In some ways, it's kind of the Muslim Christological problem, because if we have an uncreated book that's not exactly God, and yet it's not God, it's not separate from God, then we're dealing with a kind of Qur'anic version of a Christological problem that we can't quite that we can't quite resolve. And so, and if we expand that notion of divine communication, and we include the creation in that, then it raises all kinds of tricky questions. But I don't think that those questions get in the way at all of your more pastoral, the pastoral implications. That is the sacredness of the creation, and the, I think that I like the way you've connected it to real challenges and real problems that we're facing, and the very generative and pastoral implications of what this theoretical discourse. So I like that part, but I'm not sure we'll ever resolve.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
I want everyone to have a short break.
Sorry.
Obviously, we're going to have more discussion on this. It's a very interesting question. I do have another question before the break. I've got to read out in the chat box. It says, at the beginning, it was mentioned about a dualistic view, religion versus science, reflecting into education as well. I understand my question might be beyond the scope of Dr. Mehmet Ozalp's research, but how practically does he suggest to address this in the educational system?
Well, very quickly, the biggest issue, as soon as modernity hit the Muslim world with Napoleon's invasion of Egypt, it created a huge, and also Ottomans losing some of the battles in Europe. They did a study and they said, well, we're not advanced enough. We need more advanced military. But they looked at the education system. They had madrasas, which were not teaching science at all. So they established these mektabs as an alternative education system where science, or more profane, the worldly sciences would be taught. And that created, those two educational systems created societies in the Muslim world that are they have diametrically opposite vision for society, and we're still suffering from that. The latest being, the Afghanistan. You had Taliban, and before that, it was a modern liberal democracy. So we tend to go to and fro to these extremes, and at the heart of that lies not having a unified education system. So I guess one solution is that we build an education philosophy where religion and science is taught, was not just as a convenience, as a utility but with deep down there's a theological basis, that there's a belief that knowledge is one, and that, like, studying science is not un-Islamic or some Western concoction into the Western world or something like that. I think we have really huge problems in these areas, and the solution is to unify our education philosophy between science and religion.
Thank you for that. We have one comment, and we have 1 minute to respond if you wish. Tazani says that the Quran is eternal. The self-talk part of the Quran is eternal, but the letters of the Quran, the arrangements of sentences and writing materials have been created. So we're talking about the two aspects.
Yeah, the scholars, like theologians, always make that distinction, like kalam binafsi, kalam bilafsi aspect. But really the reason why this became controversy, like, is Quran is not created or not created, even the Sunni scholars who said Quran is not created, they know and that the Quran that you hold in your hand is created. That what they mean is that the Quran as speech of God is not created. Like God does not create his own speech. He speaks through his attribute. So, but this is so complex and hard to understand that at the ordinary Muslim level, so they simplify it. So I don't think we should, if we're really worried about this, we should study what scholars are saying rather than the simplified version that we are told to ordinary Muslims. There's a dramatic difference.